So we're going to wrap this up with stretching our lighting to be in a much larger context. And so the lighting previously was kind of set up for like a modest portrait studio. So nothing huge, something that you would find in your local area where you live, where people go in and get maybe graduation pictures taken or family portraits, that size of a studio. But professional studios can be very large, or even like a sound stage can be huge, and so the lighting on that's going to be a little bit different. And so I'm going to show you a flip book of a transition, and then I'm going to go back to these rendered pictures. So this is a flip book that doesn't have the full render, but it just shows you the scale context. The lighting that's coming in here is hitting his face the same direction. So my fill light, my key light, my rim light are all the same position. And so we're going to show a render of this in a little bit, but here's the context. So this is the size of a studio where a photographer might work for setting a portrait studio, family photos, and large scale studios like professional photography studios can bring in automobiles and trucks into that space, and even build, like, houses within that space. Especially a movie studio sound stage can have a lot more room. And so let's look at the lighting context. So this one, the lights are all in the same relative position, but they're much further away. So in my animation for this, I had the character standing, and I backed the plane up over him so the shadow would appear. And so this is a scale, correct? So this is the an old Lockheed TriStar jet. I flew on this type of airplane many, many, many times when I lived in Hong Kong. And so that's the correct relative size of a human to that. And so the studio for this, I mean, it's gigantic. This would be the size of a aircraft hangar. Now the lights are positioned further away. I made the lights brighter. I'm still using the physical based lighting, or the physically correct attenuation, and the physical based rendering, but the correct physical. So I had to brighten those lights up really big, and I also increased the size of them. And so they're in Houdini, as an area light with physical based lighting, or physically correct fall off. If you increase the size of the light, you're going to get a lot more light out of it, so the intensity can be lower. So it was kind of a balance of making the panel larger in scale, which gives me the softer shadow. The original size panel were so small that my shadows were getting to be very, very harsh. So I increased the size of the panels. You can check the HIP file to see how I did that. Um, and so it still gave some softness. Now there are still three basic lights: the key light, the rim light, and the fill. Now we're looking at this from an angle. Let's look at this from a different angle. So here's looking at the same picture from the starboard side of the airplane. The original camera left, looking toward it a little bit to the back. And so the lighting is still in the same position. So we got this rim light coming in, casting that dark shadow right there. Um, and then obviously where the shadows are the darkest is where the three lights shadows overlap. Then we have the key light coming in here from the planes. If we're looking at the plane from the front, same direction, top left. And then there's a fill light coming in, adding some detail in it. Here's the character underneath the airplane. And so at the beginning of where the animation of the camera begins to move on this, he's already under the full light or full shadow of the airplane, or pretty much under the full shadow. He's getting some bounce light up from the ground up, so that the bottom is a little bit brighter on him. Here's the top view. Not quite, the rim light is in the back here, so we're not exactly from the rim light's point of view, but or actually straight above the airplane. So we see the rim light shadow coming in, going forward. So the rim light's actually much further back, and then we have a key light and coming from the top right corner of this screen, and then the fill light coming in here. Here's the front view at the same camera height. I adjusted the rotation up a little bit. And so we see a lot of ground there. So the camera is much further back. And the man is standing like right in the middle there. So he's kind of hidden by the front landing gear. So we see that. And then here's the port side of view of the airplane. And so we see him standing in that space there. And so the lighting is still the same, but it shows the product. I'm using the term product here to talk about the airplane, obviously, but it's showing everything and the light and darkness that's going on in this. Because of the position of the light, we see the form of the aircraft coming up quite nicely, quite quite nicely, quite nice. And even though I'm not looking at it from the direct camera view, and I'm not looking at it from the front camera view. I'm looking at it from the side view. Just having those lights in those three different positions helps bring out the form of this aircraft, especially since I'm off to the camera right position of my original camera. So my original camera would be right there lined up along but that axis there between the character and the wheels. The key light is now acting a bit like a rim. The rim light is still acting like a rim, but almost a bit of a fill, and then the fill light's filling in some detail. Now when I created this, the fill light, I think I scaled the Y down a little bit on that. I think the fill light is smaller, so most of the light is coming from the key and the rim and the fill just because of the size is smaller. Um, but anyway, the whole idea of this set of videos is having these three different lights in position so that it builds out a nice form of your aircraft or your subject that you're trying to render, whether it's something human sized like a character, or it's large like an aircraft. Now this kind of lighting, I mean, it looks like studio lighting, and as I mentioned before, I grew up kind of in a photo studio taking pictures all the time. And so for me, it just screams like not outside light, it screams to be studio lighting. But this is good if you're trying to show off a product and positioning your lights. So this is a good place to start. Obviously, you want to move lights around to bring out the form of your particular object that you have. One thing to be um, that you have an option is that you have the option of either moving the camera around, which becomes more difficult in a studio when you have the backdrop in there, or moving the hero object, which is the airplane in this case. So you may want to rotate the geometry, the object, um, to get a different view. And so, if you were to start with this kind of setup, like for me, this is my basic default type of lighting, whether I'm doing something close or something further away. Because at the beginning, especially when I'm doing effect, I'm interesting to see what the shape, like especially like if you're doing something like destruction or some kind of geometry modeling, you want to see what the geometry looks like. You want to see what the model looks like, how it's breaking and forming, especially if you're showing to your supervisor, is this breaking correctly? And then if you have the luxury of having the lighting that it's going to be in, a lot of times effects artists begin working on effect before they actually get the camera context to put it into. And so, especially at that early stage when you're designing the effect, you want to show really what it looks like. And so this kind of three-point lighting with maybe a slight environment light, and it uh, can help you show the form of what you're looking at. And so one thing I'm definitely not going for in this video is complete realism. So this jet kind of looks like the way it's rendered, it looks like a plastic jet uh, being used in somebody's desktops. I mean, it looks like a toy. And so I'm not going after real materials. I'm not going after, really accurate shader. I'm just going after light positions and relative light levels to help bring out the form. And you see this lighting, even though I'm looking at it not from the default position that I originally set up the camera, which again, like I said, is along that axis between the front wheel and the character. Um, I'm off to the right, but it still holds up where I see the different form of the geometry being defined by those lights. Let's add a little bit of context to this. And so I'm going to play through this. This is how the animation of the jet goes, and then we see the camera moving back, and I got a little bit of wiggle in the jet there. And so that's my mistake in my animation. So the jet pulls back, and then the camera pulls back, and then the jet kind of wiggles as the camera moves. And and I'm not really sure why that happened, but this is a good way to, seeing something from another point of view is a good way to see that error. But we see the thing that we want to look at is the lighting. So at the beginning, so this is the red light set to um, the the key light is red, the fill light is green, and the um, rim light is blue. And so at the end of the shot, in particular, we see the red lighting up most of the effect, the blue coming from the back, and then the green is giving us this orange yellowish in the tip of it. And so the fill, it's a fill light. And so the fill light, since it's low, um, it's hitting straight on, and we also see it back here on the tail. And so doing a lighting like this where we split it, so if I look at red, I can see what the red does. I look at the green, I can see what the green contribution is. I can look at the blue. Now we're going to look at the same from the animated camera's point of view. There's a little bit of wiggle in the jet, but we don't really notice that from this camera view. So the jet pulls back into position. And then as the camera pulls back, I think the jet is actually moving a little bit on its own. Um, and as I said, my error. But the most important thing is we see the red, green, and blue light. And so again, if we look at the red, this is the key light. And so the key from this angle, it's looking more like a rim. If we look at it from the very beginning, the key light is coming in here. Green light is the fill. Now the fill light is being in the shadow of the jet wheels, and then the rim light's coming from the back. And so even though the camera, so even though the camera and the jet are far away, it's getting cast in the shadow, and we could say that's my error. There comes a point there where it comes out, and so the fill light is definitely lighting up the front of the character. So the important thing is that in context, in the beginning, the lights are the same position, and at the end, we have the red coming from the left and giving us that what almost looks like a rim light. And we have the green here coming from the front, lighting up the whole thing, but there is a fall off, and this is set with the physically correct fall off. Very bright lights. And then we have the rim coming in the back, and the relatively maybe the rim looks brighter, probably a larger light. So here we see the character in the high quality flipbook point of view. So it plays, the jet is moving, the camera pulls back, and then we see the character. So this is the lighting, and if I do the red, green, blue here, it's not really going to give us any information just mucking up the color. And so coloring the lights definitely helps us isolate where the light is coming from. But again, a flipbook render is a lot faster than a full blown render. Now here's the full render where the camera starts out. We're already at the frame where the character is underneath the jet. So we see it's getting a lot of fill light here, uh, or more fill light because it's the green. And we look at the red, green, and blue. And so in this position, the green is kind of the dominant, the fill light's dominant. The red is under the shadow of the plane. We're getting some red spill, term to write down. That's the light bouncing from the ground up. So we're getting red spill. Here's the rim light in the back, and see the character is completely in the shadow of the rim light and getting fills. And so in red, green, and blue, the green is dominant because that's getting the most light. Here's from the top point of view, the balcony. I guess I call it balcony. That's one heck of a balcony. And then again, the key light is coming. The red light, key light's coming from the uh, top right corner of this rendered original camera left up. Fill light's coming from the front. Fill light's pretty low, and so it's not really lighting up the ground very much. And you can see that there is a gradated fall off on this. And we see the uh, effect of still hitting the back wing, tail light as well as the front. And then we see the effect of the rim light in the back. So key, fill, rim, all three lights together. Same with the side point of view. The key light is just barely a rim from this point of view. Fill light is the most dominant from the front, and then the rim light is definitely lighting up the whole aircraft. Same from the back point of view. We see the key light here in this angle. It's dominant. The rim light or the fill light coming from the front, and then the rim light lighting up most of the back of the plane. So if we looked at it from this angle, we see that as opposed to in addition to the front view, we see the rim light, key light, fill light blending. So the key light by itself, it's giving us this kind of rim light effect. The fill lights coming in pretty much straight in, giving us those harsh, dramatic shadows. And then the rim lights giving us a big, actually just overall fill in. So all together we get this contribution. And this angle is still good for bringing out the full form of the jet. And here's the portrait position just brought back, so we see the entire studio view. And so the red light key coming in from camera left, top down, the characters in there, so he would be getting that same kind of lighting. Then we see the fill light coming in. It makes everything look very flat. A lot of scientific pictures are taken with, if you're not aware of this, a lot of like biological pictures are taken with a ring light that goes entirely around the lens. So it's like a light that attaches to the front of the lens. Gives this overall kind of a flat lighting. And then we go for the blue. And so this is the rim light. So rim light, fill light. And then here we have the character, the full body render with the red light he's getting that bounce light. And in this view, it's more pronounced. So we see the red key light. He's in the shadow of the key light at the top of his body. Part of his body is in the area of the light hitting. We see the gradation here that's the size of the light. So the size of the area light is giving us this gradation. And then so the top of his head is almost in complete shadow of the key light, but it's getting bounce light, and even as the bounce light is bouncing off the top of the bottom of the aircraft. the bottom of the aircraft, top of his head. And so uh, in this frame, the he's getting pretty much full on of the uh, fill light and looking very dramatic, but because it's very low to the ground, it's not really adding much. Looking like I said earlier, that medical camera kind of boring lighting look, and then the rim light uh, is the he's in the almost in the complete shot of the airplane. It's getting a little bit of that bounce light. The light is bouncing from the ground here up to the aircraft and then illuminating him a little bit. So definitely when we look at this, look at the red, green, and blue, we can see specifically how it brings out the form. Now, one option we have in compositing, which I'm not doing here, is we could blend these three together by adjusting their individual red, green, and blue layers in compositing, and then therefore turn that into a black and white picture for showing for dailies. And so it's not a bad idea to render something you're going to show in dailies, like an effect, especially like this destruction. You show destruction with this kind of lighting, and so you say, well, why should I render it like this when I can do a grayscale? Well, if you do this kind of lighting, um, then you're going to get three different lights, and then you could always knock it down to one of these or a blend of different, and then a blend of these, and then taking out all the saturation and giving you much more control over what you're looking at when you're presenting your effect. So if you did a blend between all of these and then knocked it down to gray, um, you wouldn't want to show this in dailies because these colors become confusing. You would want to completely desaturate it. And compositing, there's lots of ways of turning a color image into a black and white image. Like Photoshop has a uh, entire like little like plug-in effect for uh, balancing the red, green, and blue into a uh, grayscale picture for black and white. Well, I hope this helps you get an idea about basic studio lighting. I kind of beat the topic down over and over and over about the three lights and their position, their relative size. Um, but I see a lot of, especially students that are right at the beginning, beginning to work on stuff. They just really have no idea how to define a lighting setup, and so this is a very useful tip. I purposefully didn't dig into here's the numbers in Houdini. You can request the HIP files from me if you want to, but the basic concepts are important, and, and as I discussed in this. But this is a good place to start, both for close-up work and also for larger scale work. This has been Garman Herigstead, and I've been at it for over 35 years.